Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Wild and the Whites podcast. So here we are today at a undisclosed location in the Greater White Mountains area.
Out in the wild.
It is beautiful.
It is. Nice morning.
We have successfully dodged a slight little bit of rain, and looks like we're going to be okay here.
It's blue skies.
Yeah.
Nice day.
So today is a special episode. Andrew, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. No, it's fine. This is my buddy Steve. Steven. He pretty much spent the last 10 years with him in my life. It's been a special moment.
It's very romantic.
Yeah. No, we met when in college, in a live-in program down in the Lakes region for firefighting. So the two of us have kind of come up into hunting together. He's been a little bit more aggressive in getting out there, which is one of the reasons I've kind of looked up to a lot of things that he's been telling me and talking to me about. And it's been kind of interesting, the back and forth that we have, both being new-ish, obviously me being newer than him in it, but it's been kind of interesting. He's been following along on the videos and whatnot, and he was coming up this weekend. I was like, hey, what do you think about getting on the show?
Yeah.
Oh, it's tickled pink.
Giddy.
Just absolutely giddy.
And here we are. So
Cool.
This is Steven.
Yeah, I actually told my wife, because we came up here, and I said, by the
plug on
way,
the wife.
Andrew and I are going to be gone in the morning. And she's like, what? So don't worry, we're going in the woods. It's not a big deal. But yeah, I was super, super psyched for you guys to invite me on, especially not being like a super, super seasoned hunter, but just to be able to come and talk to you and see, like, be able to ask questions and kind of see the background of how you guys do this too is awesome. Really
Yeah,
cool.
well, I mean, really the bottom line, the whole point of us doing this is to preserve where we're at right now. And obviously, Steve, you're a big part of Andrew's life, and you're in this outdoors stuff, so it was a no-brainer to have you, and I'm really happy that you're here. So,
And what I like about it is he follows along, and so I'm getting the text messages
Yep.
after each video, and he's like, hey, I saw this one was really good, I got this question.
Right,
So I've
right.
been kind of funneling some of my questions through, and I was like, you know what, get your own darn channel. Do your own questions.
I start to feel like I'm going to be one of those snooty people who are like, I liked them before it was big, type thing. Like, I was the first one with a hat, and I was the first subscriber on the YouTube channel. So I feel like I'm starting to get that edgy part to me now.
that's awesome.
Oh, man.
I like that you think that this is going to be big. That's cool.
Yeah.
I do believe that. So one of the things when Andrew had talked to me and said, oh, guess what I'm going to be part of, was that, and I think we talked a little bit at like Hunt Stock when I got to see you guys in passing, was there were podcasts around New England. Massachusetts is heavy, Maine is heavy, Vermont's pretty heavy with podcasts, even Rhode Island, but there wasn't anybody in New Hampshire. And for me, as someone who would listen to podcasts like religiously for hunting, I always found that like kind of discouraging, being like, well, I understand the Vermont guys and I understand we're all in the same type of environment, but
Yep.
you still wanted to, especially as a guy who's trying to learn, you want to hear guys from New Hampshire talk about hunting New Hampshire.
The struggles, the
yeah.
benefits, all of it. Because
Yeah.
that's what I've been hearing.
Yep.
Yep.
That's one of the best parts is, yeah, we're all similar, but we're not the same.
So I've passed along, oh, hey, there's this podcast, Wild and the Whites, and kind of given the backstory and told people that I know this is you know, this is all New Hampshire. So if you've been looking for a New Hampshire one, in addition to your other New England podcasts, like this is exactly
share and subscribe.
It sounds like he's like a marketing manager
Yeah.
for us.
I have been trying because I've been wanting something like this for a while. So the
Yeah.
fact that you guys did it,
That's
has
really
been
cool.
awesome. So I wanted to help out in any way I can to market to make you guys bigger and be able to do it. So
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm sure we all appreciate that.
Yes, we do.
so it's been it's been really cool to watch, and it's been really, really interesting to learn. So
This is a live set.
I'm waiting for the audio to just be like,
Oh yeah, it's there. It's a tractor trailer truck driving by every time the wind blows. Yeah, and I'm getting attacked by this tree, but put my chair in the wrong spot.
oh man.
So our idea kind of for this, and that's the thing, like you have been bringing the questions forward, and I've been trying to answer them, and it's been great because I'll be honest, sometimes we get together and we all plan to come do a podcast, and then we look at each other and we go, so what are we doing tonight?
We spend more time like standing around throwing back and forth ideas only to be like,
Right,
I guess we could do this.
right.
30-minute podcast.
Yep.
I
2
guess we're
hours
drinking.
of planning. right. And you know what? That's when some of the fun ideas come out.
That's
true.
Your social
Yeah.
part comes
Yeah.
out.
But it had what I've been enjoying working with Steve is that like I'll bring, hey, we were just talking about this, and you're like, wow, I would actually just experience this. That might help.
Huh.
And then back and forth. What were we talking about? Bear baiting
Yep.
and spraying.
Oh, underneath the leaves.
Doing underneath
Yeah.
the leaves.
Doing stuff like that. He told me that.
His mind just went.
Like, who are you?
You don't know anything about hunting, and I'm just like,
And I have already passed along that information to a few hunters that I know who didn't know that, and then I was like, oh,
it's a pyramid scheme.
it is a pyramid scheme, because I said I learned
Right,
this from and then I just tell them about you and our history and said, Wild of the Whites podcast, go check it out. This is where I learned it. I learned it from a guy on here, so
That's awesome.
It was funny.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
there's such easy ways to test these theories, right? And that's the thing that I'm being sarcastic when I say that, because, like, yeah, you spray it underneath the leaves because it makes logical sense. But how do we know that that's right? You know what I mean? And that's so much of the outdoors is like there are people that swear by certain things, probably because it worked for them once, twice, 3 times, and they swear that that's the thing that did it. But there's so much luck involved in this too.
No joke. I was just having a conversation with a good friend of mine, just talking about hunting, just in general. And he was like, you know, when I go out hunting, I dress like my grandfather did. I've got a pair of wool pants, buffalo plaid jacket, and an orange hat. I don't own a thing of camo. Tried it, not for me. Guess what? I see deer.
Right.
And it was just kind of like this moment of there's so many things that we do because we've spent so long perfecting a certain thing and it works time and time again. Is it because you did it the way you're doing it, or is it just because it's nature in the wild and it's just
Right.
luck?
Right.
I love that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, like when I'm bow hunting, I take a very hard approach on scent control. But when I'm rifle hunting, I'm like 50-50 between when I walk and I sit during rifle. So like especially if I'm just walking, like I'm out there in a plaid shirt and an orange hat, and that's it. And like if it's cold enough, I wear my woolies. That's it. And I tape a piece of floss on the end of my barrel so I can tell like which way the wind is going.
Oh, nice.
It's another little.
I like that one. Put that one.
Yeah. Just take a like 6-inch.
I'm just sitting here like a weirdo, just writing down.
Guess what? You
Take
don't
like
have to
a-
take notes.
Yeah,
Just watch it.
That's a good point.
Take a 6-inch piece of it and just I use electrical tape on the tip of my barrel anyway, so I don't get moisture down there and rust it. A lot of people just do that on muzzleloaders, but I do it on rifles too, just to protect the inside of my barrel. So I just stick the 6-inch piece of floss in there, and then that way, if you're like in a creep stage where you're like, I think something could be bedded right in here, that's when I'll start to pay attention more to my scent than when I'm just cruising around looking for sign and all that kind of stuff. So that's when I'll check the wind and try to approach that possible area from the downwind side of it. So that's just my quick way of checking the wind direction.
Yeah.
But anyway, what we kind of wanted to go into was if you had any questions prepared to kind of do a Q&A with
I do.
you, and that way hopefully we can start to answer more questions and get more ideas for where we can go with this, because sometimes it's hard to think about what people want to hear. So I think this would be a cool episode to just do a Q&A.
Yeah, I feel like with hunting, it gets to a point where you forget how much you know, like when you've been seasoned in it. So there are guys who've been doing it for years and years and years and doing it well and doing it successfully. And just the little things that beginners have no idea, to you guys, it's absolutely second nature. It's like breathing. And you just feel that way about it. So yeah, luckily Andrew was like, hey, bring up a few questions for me.
Yeah.
And I said, perfect. So
More than a few. Just keep them rolling. Like.
I did have
Hit those comments.
I'm here, so I can't.
Our one watcher is sitting right here.
I'm working on it. I am working on it.
My mom watches them.
My
Okay?
mom. She actually did ask me
Thank
for
you.
the link to it. So the first one that I had kind of thought about and come up with, and it was a lot of these are just coming from what I'm experiencing as the preseason hits, or what I've experienced in the past seasons that I'm like, crap, did I do this wrong? All those things. So,
Quick question.
yeah.
Where do you predominantly hunt?
So I predominantly hunt.
We want GPS coordinates.
Yeah, we want GPS. I have municipalities best. So I'll do Goffstown, Deerfield, Chichester, and Raymond right now are my big spots. So southern New Hampshire, and then I guess Chichester, you're almost touching the Lakes region, but not really. So they get dispatched by Lakes region. Be nice to Chichester. So that's where I hunt right now. And obviously, so for me, I'm not dealing with mountain hunting for the most part. A lot of what I'm dealing with is actually swamps. I do a lot of swamp hunting, which is, so far, I found is really exciting and really frustrating. And that's what I'm finding out this year is the frustration of swamp hunting, when you think you know that you have a big mature buck who's in there, and you've seen these just giant prints like coming in and out of the swamp, and you set up your camera right there and nothing.
Yep.
And that's kind of what I'm hitting
Okay.
right now. But so one thing I did want to ask was, do you have a little bit of, so every year is different, but the timeline of when deer start to change their summer pattern into like pre-rut and then rut.
Yep.
What are they doing in the summer, more so, that you can kind of look for and rely on, and then when, say, like bow season hits around September 15th, and you want to get right out there on that day, well, these deer are doing summer patterns. You're not exactly bringing in, this buck with a grunt or something, or
Right,
some estrus.
right.
You're hunting
Yep.
a totally different way. So kind of going through those stages of, all right, when they're still in their summer pattern, you're maybe doing archery in September, how do you hunt? And then once we hit October, you hear things like the October lull, or they're in the middle of that. How do you change what you look for and what you do? And then obviously, when we hit the rut, what do you start to look for and do?
Yep. So first off, I'm going to plug a book that I read that changed my life when it came to this.
Oh, nice.
Okay. And it is Precision Bow Hunting by John Eberhart. And he literally breaks down every month of the year what you should be doing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah, so he starts in January and he says, in January, this is what you do. Down to like what he does to work out. Like literally it's everything. And then he goes month to month as to exactly what you should be doing during that time. And it isn't exact because he's a Midwest hunter, but it opened my eyes to a lot of different things. One thing that it opened my eyes to, and I will swing back onto your question. Don't think I'm just going off on a tangent, but is like the best time to scout. I always thought like yeah, I should be like scouting in the fall. I should be scouting during the summertime, all that kind of stuff. But he said that basically the best time to scout is right after season. Because those deer are going to forget that you were in there by the time the next season rolls around, but the sign's still visible right there.
Oh, okay.
And they typically will pattern in very similar ways. So once you start to identify certain sign being from certain things, you can say, okay, so I saw this scrape here, I saw that rub here. They're clearly bedding in here, or they bed on this south-facing slope or whatever. You can kind of just put that in the back of your mind, right? So I would definitely, it's actually an audiobook, so you can listen to it just like you do
perfect.
podcasts too.
Perfect.
It changed my way, and actually Tom Arnold, who I put the video of him shooting that nice swamp buck earlier,
Yep.
he was the one that told me about that book because it changed his life. So
wow.
Yeah.
So it's proven.
Yeah, it's a very good book, and it's very well written of just step by step, month by month, what you should be doing. So to answer your question, over the summer, I identify as best I can where they're bedding, and I identify their food sources during the summer. And keeping in mind what food sources are going to activate in that early fall, like when the acorns start dropping, when the beech nuts start dropping. Apples is a big one for early season. I love like the Forest Service orchards out here. This year was a terrible apple year. There was almost no apples in the orchards. Yeah. So I set up a stand in orchards. I did all these kinds of things ready for them, and then there weren't any apples. So, which I saw at the time that we were setting up the stand, but because they're there, but I just didn't believe that it wasn't going to be good, because it has been year after year. But I'm guessing this is just a lull year, and next year it'll be good. So those food sources for the early season are not just, they browse a lot. So you're looking at what are they browsing? Is there a cut, and they're just taking everything off the stumps of those little whips that come off the stumps? Are they is that what their main food source is right now? How fresh are those nibblings, or is it just from the wintertime when they were just eating the actual whips themselves and not any leaves? Are you looking for that food source? So you have to identify what that particular set of deer is activating on at a specific time, and that can fluctuate pretty rapidly in that August to September time, when things like blueberries hit and the bears start moving around, and they might push the deer around a little bit, or they may the apples start to drop, so then they change their pattern off of this browse, and they like the apples for a short period of time, and then they go back to the browse, and they eat up all the greenery until it turns brown, and then they hit the acorns. That's not a set in stone pattern, but that's just something that you could see. Okay. They could not go back to that browse, and they could go straight to the acorns. You don't really know what they're doing, so you just have to constantly stay up on what they're doing. Right. And one of the things that John Eberhard talks about is he will, for like, I forget if he actually set a ratio or just I've listened to so much of his stuff that I've kind of figured it out that like almost 75% of what he does are observation sits. So he'll get like 40 to 50 feet up in the tree where you can see a large way around and just observe movement. Instead of setting up cameras, he'll observe himself, practicing scent control, everything like that, and try to hone in on the movement by seeing everything himself, because a camera is going to give you 15 feet, your eyes can give you so much more, and that's that portion of just staying up on what they're doing actively right now. So that early season is the bedding area and the food source. Okay, so I have those two things pretty well identified. How are they, what time are they moving? Is it mostly in the morning that they're moving out here? Do they spend a lot of time in the food, or do they tend to roam around and go back into the bedding overnight? Or is it pretty much like they're in the food so much overnight and they're in that area, and then they work their way back to bedding during the day, and then in the evening are they getting up and they're just moving straight over into that food? Are they milling about? What are they doing? So trying to identify that movement and then setting yourself up on their trails out of the bedding for the evenings or their trails into bedding for the mornings.
Okay.
And that's going to depict your approach, right? So like if you know that they're in the food in the morning, you're not going to throw a headlamp on and stomp through the food to get to your saddle location, your stand location, whatever it might be. You're going to try to get a wind advantage area to come in on the edge of that bedding in that path, not going through their bedding because you don't want to put your scent in the bedding area and make them uncomfortable in that safe spot for them. Come through and somehow get in between those two locations. That's your early season one, and that's why a lot of people will say that that's one of the best times to kill big bucks, because if you can find a big buck over the summer, that first like bit of September, like right in that first week of opener, he should still be on that summer pattern, and you should be able to get a shot at him. And that could be your easiest time to get. So many people say that first, bit in September is like the easiest time to kill a big buck because he should still be on a direct pattern. So then what you need to do is, once you're in September, and hopefully what you did the previous season, so I definitely urge you to do it at the end of this season, is get out and figure out where in the fall you're seeing the activity and start to watch your bucks, and notice when they're moving out of that summer area. All of a sudden you're going to be like, and it's going to snap, right? So you talk about those tracks that you saw and then you're not getting anything on camera.
Yep.
That could very well be that he was in there, and like the day you set up that camera is when he decided, I'm going to start moseying towards my fall range. It could have just been that unlucky, right? And that's why I go back to a lot of this is just luck, right? So start noticing when they start moving to their fall ranges, their fall patterns, and you'll see these big bachelor groups of bucks, because what happens is over the summertime they tend to stick together. So if you find one buck, you'll typically see a bunch of them together, and that's why like when you come across like a nice bedding area and there's just rubs on every tree, that's not one buck going wild. That's a group of bachelors getting their velvet off, right? So you see that and you know that there's a bachelor group in the area. Well, where are they moving? What are they doing? And then right about like this time of year, in this like later stage of October, is when they start to hate each other and they separate because they start, competing for the same does. Okay. So as you move into October, what you want to be looking for is signs of the pre-rut. So you want to look for those scrapes, and you want to look for more of like the aggressive rubs on trees, not like the little I'm getting my velvet off stuff, but like you'll start to see the rub line. You'll start to see the bigger trees that have like really good brow tine marks in them, and they won't just be clear rubs that you can see from 50 yards. They'll be more of just like dug into the tree, because they're hitting their forehead glands on them, they're hitting their eye glands on them, and they're just trying to scent up that tree. Then you'll see like if you can identify a signpost rub. Do you know what a signpost rub is?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so if you can identify that signpost rub, it's like a community scrape where all those bucks are coming back to, right? So if you can identify that and watch for that to get hit, then that's not a velvet rub. That's now like, okay, they're starting to feel this, right? And typically the way that October goes is it fluctuates in temperature several times. So that first dip into that cold weather, that's when you want to cue, because that starts to cue them into what's coming up. That's when you want to be like, okay, I want to start looking for this sign. They're probably well into thinking about the fall. They may not be doing it yet, but they're thinking about it. And what are they doing then? And if you start to see scrapes in early October, hunt those scrapes, because that's more than likely a scrape that's been hit for years. And for example, the scrape that I'm primarily hunting right now, I found in early September before bow season. I had a buck on camera, and he passed by overnight. Big boy, big body. it was raining that day, so I took advantage of that because I'm like, I want to know exactly where he's bedding. Like, what's his range? Where am I at in his life at that camera?
Right.
So I took advantage of the rain because it's going to wash away my scent, and it's also going to make the ground soft, so a big body deer like that should be easier to track on bare ground. So I backtracked him, and about 180 yards away from my camera, I found that scrape, and he had just taken his hoof and just done one little like paw through it. He must have just come up on it, smelled it a little bit, and just like did that little paw right through and then kept on going. And I'm like, in early September, this big boy's already getting charged on that thing. I gotta remember this scrape because that's definitely one that's gonna be hit again. That's not one that he's not just doing that. He's doing that because he remembers that. So I went back in early October and it was already hit. And so I've just been watching that, and I've had I set up a camera on it, so I've got bucks fighting over the scrape on it. I've got all these different things, and it's just a matter of everything coming together when I'm there now, right? So identifying those scrapes that are used year after year are important, and the depth of them is more important than like the actual size of them. So if you can see that they're really like gored out, even if they're just 14 inches in diameter, those minorly big scrapes, you don't need to have them several feet long. Keep note of that and watch those, and put cameras on scrapes in that October area is when you should be transferring your cameras out of those pathways between bedding and food and on the signpost rubs, onto the scrapes, onto all those kinds of things, because that's where your pre-rut activity is going to come from. So once you get into that late October, early November pre-rut stage, that's when those bachelor groups are really splitting up. And I mean, it's the 26th today, and it was just like 4 days ago. I still saw three bucks all bachelored up on one of my cameras.
Oh wow!
So like there's still a lot of bacheloring that's going on. They haven't all split up quite yet, but it's with this fluctuation in temperature in that like cold front that hits in late October. That's when you want to hunt. This cold front that we're in right now is when you should be you need to be in the woods right now, because this is when
Not up here.
So it's one of those that this is that prime time. Like I say that season started Thursday. Like that drop that just happened, like everything else was practiced before then. Season started Thursday. This last cold front, this is it. This is when we're getting into that pre-rut. This is when those grunt calls, those rattle antlers could be a lot more effective starting throughout November, right?
Let's get ready to rumble.
Yeah. Like start paying attention to your cameras. If you're getting bucks fighting on them, are they really just fighting, or are they just a bachelor group sparring? You know, because most of what I've had on camera so far, actually all of what I've had on camera so far, are bachelor groups just sparring.
Okay.
I haven't seen any fights yet. So when you get into that late October, that's your pre-rut stage. So definitely hunt those scrapes. Find those scrapes that are getting hit over and over again and hunt those scrapes. Look for fresh rubs near the scrapes to show that, you know, if you don't have cameras, to show that they're hitting it there repeatedly. Look at how fresh it is. Like, is the dirt dried out? Is it wet? Like how the leaves are all falling right now. So is there flakes of dirt on top of the leaves behind where? That's one of the big cues that I look for. So like when a buck comes up and hits that scrape and starts throwing deer, if all the dirt's on top of the freshly fallen leaves, well then that's fresh.
Right.
If it's underneath the leaves, it's not as fresh. So you have to pay attention to how fast the leaves are falling. And then once you move into the end of the second week of November, like right around that 10th to 22nd, that window, those 12 days, that's roaming stage. And I mean, even the beginning of November, they'll start to do that. In that pre-rut stuff, they'll start to roam more. They'd be more active and moving around and hitting scrapes. And I'm going to find this doe group here. I'm going to find this doe group here. I'm going to put a scrape here. I'm going to put a scrape there. I'm going to set up my whole shebang and get ready for what's coming within the next couple weeks.
Right.
And so, but during the time that I just said, that 10th through like the 22nd is when you want to be finding where the does are feeding. Where are your girls? Because now during that time, that is all that the bucks are thinking about is the girls. They may not eat, they may not drink, they may not do anything except for roam between girls and trying to find the ones that are hot. And that's basically it. So find your girls and then find the funnels and pinch points between your girls and hunt those funnels and pinch points. If nothing else, hunt where the girls are.
Yeah.
Sit on right. Sit on top of where the girls are, and the bucks will at least come there. But if you can find those funnels and pinch points leading from one group to another, that's where you want to go.
Okay.
And then once you, and identifying those funnels and pinch points, they can be like saddles in a ridge line, but they can also just be. Like if you have a group of girls over that bed in this little thick swampy patch, and there's a field over here that they like to go into at night, and so they're kind of in that little region. Then you have another group over here that's sitting on this little side of this south-facing slope that's nice and warm, and there's still like browse over there, maybe some oaks that they're feeding on, and in between there's like a big swamp. And going along that swamp edge and look for the scrapes along that swamp edge and look for the rub line along that swamp edge and be like, why is it here? And then look at the terrain, and that could just be from like how wet and mucky it is on one side to how dry it is on another, and maybe there is a small little blip in, like it's not like a ridge, but it's just a little knoll that they can kind of tuck down and feel a little bit more comfortable walking along the bottom of. Like sit there and ask why that rub line is right there. Why there? Because that could be your funnel, just because it's a path of least resistance that they're following. Also look for when you're on the does, look for those paths of travel, because they're probably still in a very, very similar pattern as they were over the summer. Does don't really change their pattern that much unless something drastically comes in and really pushes them out, or it's like the food source completely changes.
Okay.
So follow those lines, and when you see the established game trails, that's often does that are doing that and not bucks. Okay. The bucks may walk along it during certain times of the year, absolutely. But check where the wind typically comes from. And speaking of wind, right? Check where the wind typically comes from, and walk like 20 yards downwind from that main game path where the does are typically running, and start looking for sign in that. Like go from like 20 yards to 40 yards down and start looking for sign, because the bucks will often roam. You can find this really well when snow's on the ground. So like when you have the highways going through the snow and you look for a buck track, go off that highway just a little bit, and the bucks are often just downwind from that main trail, because they're doing everything with their nose.
Right.
They see the world through their nose. So they can't see a hot doe. They can smell a hot doe. So they don't need to go and get them in sight. They need to smell them. So they're just constantly roaming around looking, trying to smell that scent. So they're working that wind, trying to find where the does are. So that bedding area where the does are during the day, they're probably going to walk just downwind of that bedding area in the mornings. They're probably going to circle downwind of the food in the evenings, right? They're going to do those kinds of things. So they're working the wind just as much as you are. Those scrapes that they set up, they may not show back up in November on those scrapes. And you have your camera 15 yards away from that scrape watching it, and you're like, yeah, they're not hitting it anymore. They're not there. No, they're walking 10 yards behind your camera downwind, and they're smelling that scrape as they go by, and they go, nope, nothing yet. And they just go to the next one. That's what I mean by roaming. They're cruising, just constantly moving. That's why bucks can drop 30 pounds in a month, because they're just moving and moving and moving and moving, right? So you'll get this big body frame deer, but you see their ribs,
Right.
Because they're not eating, they're not drinking. They'll often scent as they go along. They'll pee just as they walk, and you'll see it, and it's almost black sometimes because they're so dehydrated. It's
crazy.
So during that cruising time, that's what I mean by those pinch points and funnels, is you have to look at the big picture as to why a buck may roam in these different areas, okay? That swamp edge, don't check the swamp edge on the eastern side of it, because typically, or on the western side of it, because typically the wind may blow out of the west on that side, right? If the wind typically blows out of the east on that side, check the south, or check the west side of it, right? So know your winds a little bit and how they generally go, and then check the downwind side for the signs, right? And then once you get into that, like, 20th through the, like, end of December, or not end of December, end of November. I've only had one cup of coffee this morning. I apologize. So, like, that, like, last little bit of September, of November.
Poor guy. We asked, you bring him out here in the cold after working wicked late.
Midnight shift, and I didn't bring him coffee.
to host a podcast.
What kind of guy? Friend of mine.
I started strong. I'm tailing off, man. So once you get to that last little bit, they tend to be really doed up at that point in time. They tend to have, like, really found where the does are that are hot. They're working through it. All the does are in the height of when they're going to be hot at that point. So it's tougher because you want to be hunting on the does, and because that's where the bucks are.
Right.
But now you have all these extra sets of eyes that are trying to watch you too,
right,
and noses and everything.
Yeah.
So that's where that, like, November lull comes into play, right? The October lull, in that middle of October, I attribute it mostly to, like, weather, because, like, people will be like, yeah, it was really hot, and then it just shut off. We're in the October lull. Well, yeah, because we just went through it. It was 70 degrees for, like, 5 days.
Right.
And they have their winter coats on, right?
Right.
They've already shed their summer coats. So if I threw on a winter jacket because it was 30 degrees at night and 50s during the day, and I'm like, oh, I'm nice and comfortable, I'm going to get into this routine, I'm getting psyched for what's going on next month, and then all of a sudden you hit me with 75, 80 degrees, I'm not going to move until nighttime.
Yeah.
You're not going to see me doing anything. But
Right.
then that next little bit of cold comes in, I'm like, okay, sweet, I can do this again.
Right.
That's what I mostly attribute the October lull, so to speak, to, is those weather patterns. In that mid-October, we get so much fluctuation in temperature here that lull is more. And, like, what I don't understand is, like, it's nationwide. So, like, and I don't study weather patterns all over this nation, so it could be the same thing across the nation, that you're getting that fluctuation, just in a different scale. You know, in Texas, you're going from 100 degrees to 80 degrees, and 80 degrees are your cool days. I don't know. But, like...
Yeah, those Texas deer like the 80-degree weather.
Right, exactly. So that's what I attribute the October lull to, and then that end of November kind of lull pattern. All of a sudden, like, if you had a camera on a pinch point and you were just seeing bucks constantly going through it, and then you don't anymore, it's because they're happy. They found what they needed to find, right? And then you have this weird thing happen in December where all the does that were bred later in the year, from whatever year that they were birthed, their cycle is just a little bit later than the majority of does. And you get this small little blip in December that we call the second rut. Okay? And that is typically, like, right around the middle of December. So, like, right when, like, our seasons are ending, and, like, basically only Massachusetts muzzleloader season is open.
Gotcha.
Sometimes our bow season will go and just touch into the beginning of that second rut.
Yeah.
But on cameras, like, if you leave them up through December, all of a sudden you'll see a bunch of buck activity in that mid to late December in this small little blip, and then it's gone in like 3 days. But that's all those does that get bred during that second rut, get conceived during that second rut.
Yeah.
And they're birthed just a little bit later from the rest of the pack. They come into heat during that time.
Oh, okay.
So that's what that second little rut is, because you have just a small set of does that don't come into heat until like a month later than everybody else.
That's wild, because I never knew that.
Yeah.
But I have seen like the pictures up, or talking to people who have their cameras up still, and it's the weirdest thing. You have the bucks all of a sudden, they came back because they
Yes.
knew we weren't in the woods anymore, and so that's
watching.
Right.
so that's really
Right.
really interesting too. And you don't think about it's a good point. The deer that were conceived at the end
Yep.
are going to grow up later than the other ones, and they're going to get their
Exactly.
cycle.
Yep.
That's really really cool.
And so during that time is like your prime scouting, because you almost have this like rut that's happening not during the season, and you can get out there and watch what they're doing, and they're doing the same thing that they were just doing a month prior too. So that's when you get all that good scouting done, and then you move from there into their winter patterns of like, oh my God, I'm really hungry. I completely forgot about eating for the last month. And they're going to just sit on these south-facing slopes where it's nice and warm in these cold days where they can get hit by the sunlight. And if there's a food source near that south-facing slope, they're going to be hitting it hard. Like, if you can find an oak ridge on a south-facing slope, they'll be there all winter long.
Oh wow.
They'll be there all winter long. And that's when you get into shed hunting.
Right.
Which, that's where you want to be, because that's where they're losing their antlers, is during those food sources.
Very cool.
Right? So look for those warm areas with the food that they can eat, whether that be cuts with whips, whether that be those oak forests, whatever it might be. Look for those food sources during that time, because those bucks are going to be just starved. And if there's a water source near there too, great, which there typically is near food. That's where you're going to be looking for your sheds.
Wow. That is what. So it is really cool to hear where the slope face, like, it matters.
Yeah.
Because especially as a new hunter, when you look up and you're like, oh, okay, so I've heard, like, picked up his piece of information. I know that they like ridges. They'll go up high.
Yep.
But to understand why do they go up high and where are they going to go up high, they're not just going to necessarily go up high anywhere. Like, there
Yep.
always has to be that reason. Is really, and that's something that you don't automatically understand until you talk to somebody.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, that makes sense. that makes a whole lot of sense.
And if you set up your cameras in the summer on, tracks, so you see a bunch of tracks in the summer and you're like, that's a big track, and you set up your camera, and then all of a sudden in September we're dropping 10, 15 degrees in our average highs, and you're like, where'd the buck go? Is he already moving into his fall pattern? Yeah, he is, because he's no longer over the summertime. I'm guessing you're going to find them more on the north-facing sides, because that's the cooler side, and they want to stay cool on the northern side. But then all of a sudden, you lose them. Just go check that same ridge line on the other side.
The other side.
He's probably swapped over onto the southern-facing side.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really cool.
And the other thing, too, just to touch on that, scouting-wise, if you're looking all over the place during the summer for sign, remember to hit the south-facing ridges and look for your sign and be like, oh, there's nothing fresh, but this all looks like it was from last rut, because it was all on that south-facing side over the summer. And feel free to do that, because they're probably all sitting on the other side of that ridge on the north-facing side, and you're probably not even going to bump them out. Your scent's going to be long gone by the time they move over onto that south side.
Wow.
And it's not just that simple, but like that's the thing that you want to keep in your mind too.
General idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that was. I have a lot of questions. That's going to take you a long time to answer. So
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
You're going to have to. I'm going to have to send you the questions, because it's going to take a few episodes if you do all my questions.
Part 1, part 2, part
Pretty
3.
much. But so another big one was that I think will mess up, especially newer hunters, is scent control, right? Like you talked about how important scent control is, and you have a lot of experienced guys who are like, scent control is very, very important.
Yeah.
And so knowing the direction of the wind is kind of self-explanatory until we get into like swirling winds, like we
Yeah.
talked about earlier.
Yep.
But the big one, especially when I first started to get serious about it, that really tripped me up was thermals.
Yeah.
And how,
Yeah.
and so how do you identify where thermals are? How do you play thermals? Because at some points there are times where maybe being at a certain point in a tree where you're used to, maybe to your detriment because of where the wind's coming in. It's
Absolutely.
bringing down. So
New guy here. Hi. Long time listener, first time caller.
First time caller.
So, just a quick pause between the two of you. My mind just went from thermals. Oh, underwear.
Yeah, nice underwear.
Okay, no. Thermals. Oh, cameras? No. What are we talking about? Thermals.
This is a big reason why.
Yeah.
Like, it took me a little while of listening to, and I had no idea this existed.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I hear it, and it's a big deal, and I had no idea.
It is,
So-
because they can override a prevailing wind, and I have a great story about that from my last hunt that I just did last Thursday.
It's not underwear.
So to answer your
Sounds
question, Buckley, it is the overall idea of thermals is that air currents, as they warm up, they pull upwards, and air currents, as they cool down, they go down. Okay. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. That's the basic idea of it. When you watch the birds and they're circling around and they're getting higher and higher and it looks like they're just gliding, they're working a thermal current and they're just using that to go up and up and up and up.
I did hear
So-
those turkey vultures are good for, like, if you want to spot one.
Exactly.
The turkey vultures
Yep.
do ride them, and that you can spot them like that. which is-
Birds
it's
take
cool that you
advantage
said
of those
that.
like crazy, so they can literally just fly into one and just chill out and relax with their wings out, and it just does everything for them. That's the basic idea of them, but they're way more complicated than that, and I do not pretend to be an expert on them, because every single time I'm like, yeah, so I'm going to play the thermal this way. I sit in the tree, I'm like, well, it's not doing what I thought it would do.
And that's why I asked the question,
Yeah.
because these thermals just seem to be so difficult, especially for seasoned guys.
Yep.
They can be difficult,
Yeah.
and for new guys, it can feel daunting trying to even figure out how to play a thermal.
Right.
How do they play into hunting?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the story from this past Thursday. So I left work early to go hunt that scrape. And the reason why I did that is because we had that 15-degree drop in high, and I knew that they would be moving that day. So I was like, this is the day, that changeover, I want to be in the woods today. So I went out, and because we had that high drop in temperature so much, I knew that the ground temperature was going to be still kind of warm from that heat wave that we had, and the air was going to really like just go nuts with it. So the wind was completely wrong for me to hunt the scrape out of the tree that I typically do, but I knew that the thermals were going to be acting hard in that much of a drop in temperature, and I looked at how much the temperature was going to drop in that like last 2 hours of light, and I was like, it's gonna be hard. And so I took a chance, and so this scrape is on the edge of a side hill. Okay, it's also on the it's kind of south facing, but not really. It's more like northeast facing side of it, but the way that the sun kind of goes, it can shine through from the south pretty easily, even though it's on that northern side of it. It's hard to explain without actually showing you, but so
Edit that out.
So the prevailing wind was northwest. So literally, like, the tree that I typically hunted in is on the western side of the scrape, and it was going to be blowing my scent right over the scrape if I sat in that tree that I typically sit in. So I went, I was planning on going on the other side, but because I saw how much the thermals were going to play, I ended up sitting in the tree that I typically do. And the thermals will pull air from the top. As everything cools down, it goes from the top to the bottom in temperature. So that the top of the ridge will cool down faster than the bottom of it. And that air current naturally gets pulled down that slope as it cools. So I sat in that tree with a prevailing northwest wind, but it was a southeast wind the entire time I was there, because that thermal was so strong it overrode the prevailing wind. And so thermals also come into play with the overall swirling effect that we get is often because of the changes in the temperature, not because of the wind itself. And so if you are sitting in a bowl down on the ground because you know that it's a path of least resistance between two ridge lines, and you're in this little bowl, and you know that the thermal is going to suck right down and pull your scent down, and you're sitting in the base of that bowl, then that thermal is going to keep your scent just bowled up right in there with you. It's not going to let it go anywhere because it's always pulling down. No matter which way that wind is blowing, the thermal is going to keep it all low. If you're sitting there in the evening when it's cooling down, right? If you're sitting there in the morning, it's going to pull your scent up and blow, and the wind's going to take it from there, right? So if you want to work a thermal properly, sit at the bottom of a ridge line in the evening with, say, something that you don't, obviously with something that you don't care blowing your wind all over, your scent all over, and know that. So like if your wind's blowing from the west and the thermal's going to suck it down and it matches your prevailing wind, then you know that it's going to just blow in this one direction. If your thermals are fighting against the wind, that's when that swirling effect can happen. And then also, so like in the morning, if you sit on the top of the ridge and the wind matches the thermal, then you can get the wind to just carry that scent up over that ridge line and do nothing for soaking up in the woods at all. But if it doesn't match, so like the thermals are pulling it up, and the mornings are easier with thermals because they'll pull your scent upwards, so they'll typically always match, unless you got some weird land feature, they'll always match the prevailing wind because the prevailing wind will just take your scent that way, and the thermal's pulling it up into that wind. In the evening, they can really easily fight each other because it's sucking it down onto the ground. So, in terms of trying to play the thermals, like I said, it's so unpredictable sometimes, but that general theme of up in the morning, down in the evening is how you want to play it. Another great way to play a thermal is if you're sitting on a stream bed and you set up the stream bed downhill from you and downwind from you. Because then that thermal will it'll match the wind, right? And the thermal will suck your scent right down to that stream, and the stream has a thermal itself. So that stream is creating a small little wind current right over it, and it'll suck all your scent right downstream.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And that if you sit in a tree with enough baby powder and you just want to just keep tossing it up in little bits, and you can watch it do that, and it's wild. Or you throw up some of that, what's it called?
The milkweed stuff?
Exactly, yeah. And watch where it goes. You can see that. Do that. Set up just upwind from a stream and have it downhill from you in an evening with a good thermal drop, and do that and watch it just float right down, and then it'll hit that stream and it'll just go right downstream. It's wild. It's super cool when you see that. Yeah,
that's cool. So I forget where I saw the milkweed trick, but I didn't realize like how effective that was for just checking, because I've seen baby powder, but like Andrew can tell you, I got this weird thing about, like, I like to be able to identify, like, flora and fauna in New Hampshire. So I'm really good at identifying plants and trees and crap. And I was like, oh, I know that's milkweed, and I know where I can find it. So you just see me like this weird hobo just taking these milkweed pods, just trying to. People are like passing me, like, what the heck? But I've used that to be able to see, like, and it was crazy because I knew that I had a prevailing wind, and we talked about that swirling wind, and I knew that I was gonna have like a northwest wind coming into my spot, and I get up in my saddle and I'm finally there, and I'm like, this doesn't feel like a northwest wind. And lo and behold, I throw out some of the milkweed, and it's just
right. And that's when so if that thermal's sucking the air down along the ground, and now you're 25 feet up in a tree, and the prevailing wind is going opposite that thermal, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to set up here because prevailing wind is northwest and I'll be here. But then all of a sudden that thermal is working a land feature. It's going to just create this swirl effect around that land feature. Or if it's going opposite the prevailing wind, then you get a swirl effect between the two. And that's where you can sit there with milkweed and just watch it go up and all over you, and you're like,
Yeah, that's right.
I don't even know.
I don't know
Okay.
where this is going. I was like, all right, wind is the most important thing. Throw the milkweed up, and it's just going everywhere. I'm like,
Right.
Good thing I'm playing the most important thing. I feel so good about doing this for the next 5 hours because I feel successful.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so that was really, really helpful, like with thermals. And I know that the answers are really, really general. Like even when I ask you, oh, what do you do for pre-rut and what are they doing in the summer versus blah, blah, blah. Because if deer were easy to figure out,
Right.
this wouldn't be so hard.
Right.
But it is definitely helpful. So the thermals, when you're trying to figure out what you want to do as far as a spot, right? One thing that I had heard, but I wasn't sure was totally true, was if you don't know exactly what thermals are going to do in your area, but like the general idea is that they're going to raise in the morning and they're going to come down, you have a better shot at being up in your tree in the morning because everything's raising. But if you are going to do like an afternoon sit, you run more of a risk being up in that tree and having your scent go down. But I didn't know if that was necessarily true or if anyone ever really changed, like, oh, I'm not going to use my saddle or my tree stand because I'm doing an afternoon hunt, because maybe my scent's now going down into the area.
Yes. So in the evening, I would really put an emphasis on having the thermals match the wind, the prevailing wind, because then it'll help so much. And I mean, you're still going to have to deal with land features, right? Are you sitting down in that bowl and just filling it up with your scent, or are you sitting uphill from a stream, right? So you still have to deal with the land features, but overall, if you don't have a prevailing wind that's fighting the thermal, then it'll match so much easier.
Okay.
And so you just have to work where you set up and don't be upwind from where you think the deer are going to be. So like I have a very awesome spot. I actually posted a video of me missing a forkhorn at that spot.
Oh no.
And I've only hunted there twice this season so far. Because I will only hunt it with a southeast wind. And if it's because of the way that the slope is, it is on the like drastically southwest side of this ridgeline, and the thermals will match a southeast wind identically to how I walk in and walk out. So I'm only while I'm sitting in the tree, I'm only putting my scent over where I walked in. And it'll only be that way, and it doesn't swirl when I'm up there because it drops right off this steep embankment and just goes right down to where I want it to be.
That's cool.
And so I won't go up there when it could be fighting that. Like if it's a northwest wind, I could come into that general area from the complete other side and still have luck on it. But coming in from like the easiest way to sneak in and out of there, I won't touch that route unless it's a southeast wind. So to answer your question, it's harder in the evening, yes, but as long as you try your best to match the direction that thermal is going to go with the prevailing wind, then it's good. And I mean, like with that slope, it's a did I say a southwest? It's a southeast facing slope. And so when I have a southeast wind, it drops off no, it's a southwest facing slope. I'm all messed up.
Apparently, me at night and Zach in the morning, not good.
Yeah. So it's a southwest facing slope.
Oh man.
And it warms up a lot during the day because it's clear cut. So there's not a lot to prevent the temperatures. from changing. So it drastically drops in the evening, and it drastically warms up in the morning. So hunting it in the evening, as long as I match that southeast wind, the way that it blows, it takes my scent exactly where I want it to go.
So you don't worry about it nearly as much.
No.
As long as you've matched it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So my question number 3 is very controversial. And I'm excited. It's a scent cover.
Yeah.
You have guys who swear by scent cover. You guys
Yep.
have guys who say scent cover is absolute nonsense. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts and your experiences. Scent cover, is it really? You're pretty much not going to mask your scent,
Right.
right?
Yep. Not completely. Yep.
Right. We've seen things like, oh my gosh, what is it? Is it Nosebuster?
Yeah, that I know what you're talking. Yeah.
So it's something that they have like
Yeah.
vanillin in it.
Yeah.
And so apparently what I have been told was that vanillin, being a naturally occurring chemical in and around even here, you can spray something like that, vanillin, on yourself, or even spray like the underside of leaves with vanillin and like canola oil, like vanilla extract and canola oil, and they'll smell it and be interested, and it won't spook them.
Yep.
So just scent cover in general, scents, like,
Yep.
what are your thoughts on?
So, I mean, I guess there's so many different types of scents, right? So, like, you have your attractants that smell like yummy food. You've got your different types of urines that they have to try to mimic different types of seasons. You have stuff that's supposed to, like, cover up your specific human scent. So
I guess we'll start with scent cover. Like, how do you feel
Yep.
about scent cover?
So, just to confirm, that's to cover your personal scent, right?
Right.
Okay. So, I utilize the sprays that are supposed to eliminate scent on clothing.
Okay.
Right. So I wash my clothes with non-scented detergent. I put it in a scent-proof bag so that when I'm cooking bacon in the morning, it's not all over my
Right.
clothes. Right. And
You're hungry, I can tell. He's moaning really loud
Bacon.
for the bacon.
And then when I go out, I spray down before I go out. My boots, like head to toe, I spray down in scent elimination spray.
Okay.
When I go out, I always have as much skin covered as possible, so I don't brush up against stuff and leave my scent directly on something from touching it. Always I wear gloves when I go out and touch everything, all my hunting gear with gloves on, everything like that. Then when I come back, like all my ropes and not ropes, you don't want to do it with ropes specifically, it'll degrade your saddle ropes, but all of my my harnesses, like my bow hanger and my bag hanger and stuff like that, all those things that can be exposed to ozone. I have an ozone generator that I have a little closet
That was another question I had.
Yeah.
So
that I put in there just to help eliminate the bacteria that causes any type of scent buildup on it, right? So I'm not trying to eliminate my scent. I'm trying to stop it from building up, right? My good buddy Travis, he just leaves his clothes out in the wind. And that pretty much does the same thing. Like he'll hang it out outside and let it just air out. And that does a lot of the same stuff.
okay.
And it may even do it in a better way because ozone almost has like a chlorine smell to it when you build it up too much in your clothing. So you have to be careful about airing it out, because ozone, if you know anything about how it actually works, is it'll attach to the molecules, but it won't actually go anywhere until it's aired out. It'll just sit on it. So if you don't air out anything that's been ozoned, it'll just build up its own smell. So you got to constantly air out the ozone stuff too, and I think that helps eliminate the scent a little bit better than just having it outside.
Right.
So that's what I'll do, and then I'll put my gloves on. I'll pack up my backpack and everything like that with gloves on. I'll bring it out and then spray everything down right before I go out. Again, and just try not to touch anything with my bare hands, with bare skin, and then always playing the wind to try to get my scent where I want it to go, because I will have some scent that's left behind. So I want to try to utilize the wind to not only have it where if I have something come in, it's not going to smell me directly, but also where am I leaving that behind? Because that scent's going to linger after I'm gone. And that's why, like, hitting the same tree over and over and over and over again, well, you're just saturating it with your scent, and that's going to probably push some things out of there.
Right.
So a lot of, like, the scent lock clothing and stuff like that I wear is to help not saturate an area with my scent. It's not to try to not smell like a person. It's just to try to eliminate as much scent from being left behind, from being present while I'm there. It doesn't eliminate it. It just reduces it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So all these people that are spending a lot of money on hunting clothing, I choose to do it with hunting clothing that also has the carbon technology, the activated carbon technology of scent lock. And it's super easy to activate. It's heat. You toss it in a dryer, and it all activates up, and it eliminates the scent that's on it. So that's how scent lock works. Okay, so you just have to. I always will wash it on delicate with scent-free soap, detergent, and then toss it in the dryer, and it activates the carbon, and it helps eliminate the scent that's been left behind on it. So it's very similar to like an ozone, and I can hang my clothes up in my ozone closet too, and treat those as well if I need to. Like if I've got like a really, really sweaty day that I go out, and it's 75 degrees, it's early season, I'm sweating my balls off, then I probably will ozone everything first, air it out, then wash it, then dry it, and then put it in my scent proof case.
Yeah.
So again, it's not about not smelling. It's about reducing it and reducing your footprint left there. A lot of times, like, if I go hunt a spot, I'm not going to go back to that spot for like at least a week, because I don't want to just pile up my scent. Weather will play a role in that too. If it's raining and I can be confident that it dispersed a lot of my scent and kind of I might go back sooner, right, onto a spot. But so keeping the covers, I don't use a specific cover scent. I use scent elimination spray to try to reduce it, because I've read and I've found when you get like does and young bucks, it doesn't really play that much of a role. But when you're dealing with bucks that have been there, done that, I've seen shit, right? Like they're the old veteran bucks, right? Yeah. They have PTSD for some things, right? They've been shot at before. Right. They've seen friends die.
They've had an arrow in them.
Exactly, yeah. They've had an idiot throw an arrow over their back when they were a fork horn, and now they know that danger comes from above, right? So they've learned over time. And if they're like, I don't normally smell that sweet, yummy smell over there, I don't even care about that spot, you know? Yeah. That's always in the back of my mind of like, deer don't think, in my opinion. They don't think. They react. So like, because it's all survival, right? So like, when something happens, they react to it. And their reaction is to preserve themselves, you know? So unless it's a doe with a fawn, then she's trying to actually be killed so her fawn can be saved. Right. But other than that, they're trying to preserve themselves. So they react. So if this old buck is just like, that's too good to be true, I'm out.
Not,
you know,
something's not right.
So, but meanwhile, you're going to have that fork horn and be like, oh, yeah, that smells delicious. Right. I'm going to go with it, you know. And he'll walk in and you'll snap a twig above his head and he'll just be like,
just look directly at me.
Well, that's strange. But this still does smell really good. And he'll stand there for 15 minutes and just look back at you and be like,
is that branch looking at me?
Yeah.
That's one big owl.
Right. Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh.
So yeah, I mean, does that answer your question about scent?
Yes, it does.
Cover?
Yeah. So because like I said, you have so many different opinions out there, because you just can't quite know. But that makes them to me, anyways, that makes the most sense.
I mean, if you want to just go slay whatever comes in, then yeah, use those yummy scents because something's going to come in on it.
Right.
It might be a doe, but it's going to come in on it, and a doe tastes delicious. I don't care about shooting does, right?
Yeah, if you're
love shooting
meat
does.
shooting versus
Absolutely.
target, like actually target hunting.
Right, but if you're like in the territory of a big buck and you don't want to spook that big buck out,
Yep.
then I would just try to reduce as much of your footprint as possible and not add anything else to it unless you're utilizing a natural scent. And what I mean by a natural scent is like if you're hunting the rut and you want to use like actual glands from a doe to try to entice that buck. I know guys, Tom Arnold being one of them, he literally is that creepy guy that's got jars with like deer nuts and deer vaginas in them, and he'll hang them from trees.
amazing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's like the Blair Witch Project.
But-
Wherever he's hunting, it's just these parts hanging from trees.
Where the heck?
But
hunting here.
when you think about it, that's the most authentic smell you can get for being enticing.
Right.
So it makes sense. Like it really, like when you boil it down, you're like, on the surface, you're like, that's messed up. I don't want to know.
There's a fine line between authentic and creepy.
But you know, when utilized in a certain way and not a creepy way, you know.
Yeah.
But then like I use tinks a lot. During that roaming phase that I was talking about, that like mid-November roaming phase when not a lot of the does have come into their heat yet because they tend to be a little bit closer to like the 20th that most of them come in. They're like really ready to go, and there's not a lot of does, if any, that are ready to go. And so some doe estrus during that time can be very, very useful.
Okay.
And saturating an area with a good, not oversaturating, but like if you find a scrape in an area and it keeps getting hit, and so you know the bucks are in the area, putting some doe estrus in that scrape, that's how that doe is supposed to communicate that to that buck anyway.
Right.
So going along with their pattern, or hanging a wick above your stand so that it kind of, you know, permeates throughout the area, and that buck, you may happened to me last year where I had set up the night before. It was going to be an east wind, and I always hunt it with a west wind, and in the morning it was swapping to a west wind, but the east wind was going to blow all over the area that I'm looking, right? So I hung a wick with some doe estrus on it, and this was like around the 10th, give or take a day or two. And the next morning I came in and I hunted it, and I'm sitting there in the stand, and all of a sudden, like 120 yards in front of me, I just see antlers get up and just start roaming the swamp edge. And like it was a drop off like that, and all I could see was the antlers above, so I couldn't see body at all. So I'm sitting there like, come on.
Yeah.
And then he just like disappeared down into the swamp, and I never saw him again. But he had bedded, like I saw him stand up. Like it wasn't like the way that area was, I could tell that he didn't come in or out of it. He was bedded down on that swamp edge. So he had literally just sat down and been like, she'll be back soon. I'll just hang out here.
Yeah.
You know? So utilizing those types of things, yeah, I'll do that, absolutely. But I try to, as much as I can, match what's going on in the woods at that time. Like I just used some buck pee in that scrape to try to piss off the bucks enough to get them to come in during shooting light.
Gotcha.
Because that's what they're doing right now, is they're communicating through those things.
Right.
And they're more worried about other bucks right now than the does, because they're trying to set up their territories.
Right.
So right now I'm utilizing the buck scent.
Right.
That middle of November, I don't care about that. They're so worried about the does. Yes, they don't want other bucks around, and you will see fighting and stuff like that when they do link up, but they're not so locked into that, in my opinion. I think that doe estrus plays more of an effect during that time. And at that point, unless you're going for a doe, yum smells are going to do nothing for you, because they're not thinking about food at all.
Right.
So
if anything, if you were going to do yum smell, it would be like that early season, right when it hits right in the beginning.
Yes,
if you're going to go after a buck or something like that,
absolutely,
that's when you.
Yep.
Okay.
Especially if you're already hunting a food source that they're used to coming into.
Right.
And you can kind of like if you are hunting an orchard and you use an apple scented smell, you know, one of my favorite ones that I do for bear season, but I've done it in orchards before, is mixing vanilla and apple cider vinegar.
Oh, really?
Yes, and it smells delicious. And so you just spray some leaves around you with a little bit of that attractant smell, and it's mimicking a smell that's already present and just making it more than what it is.
Right.
I like that versus introducing a random foreign smell to an area that's not usually there.
Right.
So I try to mimic what's going on in that specific area. Now, I'm not saying that if you find a bunch of oaks that they're on and then you throw a bunch of apple scented stuff out there, you know, spray it out all over the leaves or whatever you want to do, like, that they're not going to be like, oh, that's cool too.
Right.
Because there's going to be plenty of deer that do that. I tend to try to match it as much as I can and make it more authentic because I feel like they're more comfortable that way.
Yeah.
I have seen deer in the past, a doe specifically, that came in and it was in an orchard and I had used apple scented smell, but even that addition, she like came in upwind of it and was just like, she would stomp her feet and she was looking around like, this is a lot more than what I'm used to like I don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, it was an orchard that I had used that same scent in the year before, and there were a couple does when I killed my doe out of that stand. And so it very well could have been one of those does that saw another doe die before her eyes while smelling that smell. Yeah. So, like, it could have absolutely been that
Gertrude,
too.
no.
Right? So there's other levels to it.
Right.
I don't want to say that was the only thing going on. There's other levels to it that could have played a big role in it.
Right.
But I have seen that, so that's why I just try to match it as much as I can.
Yeah. Which makes sense too. And I think, like, now that you pointed out, thinking about if you are going after a target buck, they got old because they were smart.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
they tend to be more wary of those new things. So fifth question.
Okay, so let me stop you for a second.
I was like, I have so many.
We are just running low on battery on this thing, so do we want to end this as part one, and then I'll just swap the batteries out, we can sit here some more, and we'll do part two?
Oh, dude, yeah, that works out for me.
And Andrew's already gone.
Andrew, yeah. All right, part two for another day.
All right, guys, well, we'll catch you on part two coming right up next week.